The council chamber stretched across half a kilometer of polished stone and projected starlight, a monument to the power of the three great civilizations that ruled the galaxy, now for 2,000 years without interruption or challenge from any force that dared oppose them. Sissy stood at the edge of the amphitheater and felt smaller than she had ever felt in her entire life. Watching the representatives of 100 worlds argue about trade routes and mining rights while the real discovery sat ignored in her data tablet, she was young for a Kreeth archaeologist, barely past her second molting, and her scales still showed the bright green of youth rather than the deep crimson of the elders who commanded respect in academic circles across the Dominion. The human data cache changed everything, though. Or it should have changed everything if anyone would listen to her. For 3 months, she had excavated the dead world they called Sepulchre 9, a barren rock on the outer edges of explored space where nothing should exist but dust and radiation. Instead, she found the vault buried 2 kilometers deep in bedrock that predated the current galactic calendar by at least 15 centuries, sealed behind alloys that resisted every scanning technology her team possessed until they finally cut through with plasma torches that took 16 days to breach the outer door. Inside, they found servers, thousands of them, arranged in geometric patterns that suggested purpose and design beyond mere data storage. The files were encrypted, but the cipher key sat waiting in the first directory, almost like whoever built this place wanted it to be found eventually by someone patient enough to look. What Sissy found in those files terrified her in ways she could not fully express to the dismissive council members who barely glanced at her evidence. Humans were real, not legends or myths told to children or fragments of confused oral histories from primitive species who confused their own ancestors with visitors from the stars. They were advanced, more advanced than any current civilization. And they had fought something. The logs called it the Silent Cessiseth. Read thousands of entries written by people with names like Chun and Rodriguez and Okafor, military officers and scientists and colony administrators who documented their desperate war against an enemy that consumed entire star systems. The entries spanned centuries and grew more desperate with each passing decade as humanity threw everything they had against an enemy that adapted to every weapon and learned from every defeat. The final entry was brief. We are initiating Protocol Darkfall. A fleet admiral named Sarah Chen wrote in text that still carried the weight of command across 2 millennia. All colonies beyond the rim are being evacuated or going silent. All military assets are being repositioned to the containment zone. We cannot let it reach the home galaxy at any cost. Then came the part that made Sissy's blood run cold every time she read it. If you are reading this, we either failed and you should run as far and fast as your ships can carry you, or we succeeded and we are still out there in the dark between galaxies, holding the line, waiting for the day we can come home. The file ended there with coordinates that pointed to empty space beyond the galactic rim where no stars burned and no civilization had ever ventured, because there was nothing out there worth finding, or so everyone believed. Sissy tried to present her findings to the academic community first, thinking that scientists would appreciate the historical significance, even if they doubted the military implications. Instead, they called her a fraud. The Luminari professors claimed the data was too convenient, too well preserved, clearly fabricated by someone seeking attention or funding for worthless expeditions. The Z researchers were more direct and simply stated that humanity was a myth and no amount of manufactured evidence would change the consensus of established science. Only the Kreeth gave her a hearing, and that was merely because one of the Dominion's intelligence officers thought the files might contain useful technology that could be reverse-engineered and weaponized. That was how she ended up here in the council chamber. waiting for her turn to speak while the great powers argued about matters that seemed trivial compared to what she had discovered. Chair recognizes researcher Sizith of the Kreeth Archaeological Institute, the moderator finally announced. After 3 hours of debate about farming subsidies, she approached the central platform and activated her presentation, filling the holographic display with images of the vault and excerpts from the human logs. Honored representatives, she began, and hated how young her voice sounded in the vast chamber. I have discovered evidence of a precursor species known as humanity, and more importantly, evidence of a threat. They fought for over 500 years. The murmuring started immediately, and she pushed forward before they could interrupt. The threat is called the Silence, and according to these records, it is an extragalactic force that consumes all matter and energy in its path, converting worlds into more of itself, adapting to any defense, learning from every encounter. A luminary counselor flickered with what Sizith had learned to recognize as amusement. You expect us to believe in monster stories? The being of coherent gas asked in harmonics that translated to barely concealed mockery. I expect you to examine the evidence. Sizith replied and tried to keep her voice steady. The dating on these files is consistent. The technology is beyond anything we currently possess, and the coordinates they provide point to nothing. A Z commander interrupted with clicking mandibles that suggested impatience. We have surveyed the galactic rim thoroughly and found no evidence of any threat or any human civilization. Because they went dark, Sizith insisted. Because they took the fight beyond our space to protect the galaxy from enough, the council moderator declared. We appreciate your enthusiasm, young researcher, but this council deals with reality, not fantasy. Your findings are noted and will be reviewed by the appropriate academic committees, which meant they would be filed away, and Forgotten Sizith wanted to argue, but she saw the dismissal in every eye, and sensory organ turned toward her and knew that pressing further would only damage her credibility. More, she gathered her data and left the chamber, feeling the weight of knowledge that no one else believed. 3 days later, the first reports came in. From deep space monitoring stations, gravitational anomalies along the galactic rim, massive ones, dozens of them, moving in patterns that suggested coordination and purpose. The station sent query signals and received no response. They sent probes, and the probes vanished. By the end of the week, an entire monitoring outpost went silent mid-transmission with its final message consisting of 2 words repeated over and over until the signal cut off completely. There. Here. Sizith read the reports in her quarters and pulled up the human files again, scrolling to Admiral Chun's final entry, reading the warning that 2,000 years had not diminished the coordinates Chun provided sat in her navigation computer waiting. She wondered if humanity was still out there fighting. She wondered if they would come back. She wondered if the galaxy that had forgotten them and dismissed their sacrifice would survive long enough to find out. The anomalies continued to multiply, and the council finally called an emergency session. Sizith was not invited, but she monitored the proceedings from her quarters and watched as the comfortable certainty of the 3 great civilizations began to crack under the weight of something they did not understand approaching from the dark. The Kryn system died in 14 hours from first contact to complete silence, and the galaxy learned what terror really meant when 3 billion souls stopped transmitting anything at all in the space of a single planetary rotation. The council mobilized every available ship and sent them racing toward the outer rim, where the gravitational anomalies had resolved into something far worse than anyone had imagined. The Silence was not a fleet or an army or even a conventional threat. The military Doctrine could address it was a swarm millions of constructs, each the size of a small moon, moved through space like locusts through a field, stripping entire worlds down to their cores and converting the matter into more of themselves. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They simply consumed the Kreeth Dominion, sent their heavy battle carriers with weapons that could crack planets. The Z Collective deployed swarm ships of their own that numbered in the tens of thousands. The Luminari brought energy weapons that burned at temperatures matching stellar cores. None of it mattered. The silence-adapted kinetic weapons were met with shields that redirected momentum. Energy weapons were absorbed and used to power the swarm's own systems. Missiles were intercepted or hacked or simply ignored as the constructs calculated that their defensive expenditure exceeded the damage potential. Every tactic the Council forces employed worked exactly once before the silence learned and countered it. Commander Thrak of the Kree Third Fleet watched his carrier group get systematically dismantled in the outer beacon engagement and could not understand what he was seeing. His tactical officer called out reports in a voice that climbed higher with each passing minute as squadrons vanished from the display. "They are predicting our maneuvers," the officer said. "Every formation we deploy, they counter before we complete it. Every firing solution we calculate, they evade before we lock. It is like they can read our intentions." Thrak had fought pirates and rebels and rival nations throughout his 30-year career, but he had never faced an enemy that learned faster than he could adapt. "Full retreat," he finally ordered. When his fleet had been reduced to 30% combat effectiveness, "All ships fall back to Rally Point Sanctuary." Only 12 ships made it out. The GF fared no better in the Cloudbreak Nebula, where their numerical advantage meant nothing against an enemy that treated every engagement as a learning opportunity and improved with each exchange. The Luminari lost their entire expeditionary force when the Chiu Silence deployed some kind of harmonic disruptor that shattered their coherent forms and scattered them across light years of empty space. 3 weeks after the fall of Kryn, the Council had lost 47 systems and over 1 trillion sentients, and the silence showed no signs of slowing its advance toward the populated core region. Sisith watched the casualty reports climb and felt vindicated. In the worst possible way, she had been right, and now billions were dead. The Council finally summoned her, and this time there was no mockery in the chamber. Only fear and desperate hope that maybe the crazy young archaeologist had answers in her ancient human files. What did they do? The Luminari counselor, who had mocked her 3 weeks ago, asked now with harmonics that suggested genuine desperation. How did humanity fight this thing? Sisith displayed the tactical log she had extracted from the data cache and watched the military officers lean forward to study human battle doctrine from 2,000 years ago. "They fought for 500 years, she explained. They lost thousands of ships and hundreds of worlds. They tried everything we are trying and failed the same ways we are failing. Then how did they survive?" Commander Thrak demanded. "The records indicate they contained the silence. How?" "They stopped fighting it like a conventional enemy," Sisith said, and pulled up a file labeled Operation Dogfall. "They realized the silence was a machine intelligence, sophisticated, but still bound by its programming to consume and replicate." The tactical display showed a 3-dimensional map of human space before the war and the containment zone humanity had established. At enormous cost, they created a perimeter, using weapons specifically designed not to destroy the silence but to disrupt its coordination. Sisith continued. Quantum jammers that prevented the constructs from communicating. Dimensional mines that isolated sections of the swarm. Hunter-killer drones that targeted the control nodes rather than the individual units. Do we have specifications for these weapons? A Z officer asked with mandibles clicking in what Sizith recognized as excitement. No, she admitted. The files contain references but not schematics. Humanity took their technology with them when they went dark. The disappointment in the chamber was palpable, however. Sizith added quickly. The files indicate that humanity did not destroy the silence. They contained it beyond the galactic rim, which means they are still out there fighting it. Which means they might help us if we can contact them. How do we contact a civilization that vanished 2,000 years ago? The council moderator asked, in a tone that suggested he thought Sizith was grasping it. Desperate hope, she displayed the coordinates from Admiral Chun's final message. We send a signal to these coordinates. And we wait, she said simply. Council debated for 3 hours, while the phaseboid silence consumed 2 more systems. Finally, they authorized the transmission. Every deep space relay station along the rim was tasked with broadcasting a simple message in all known languages, plus the human languages Sizith had decoded from the files. This is the Galactic Council requesting aid. We are under attack by the force designated the Silence. Humanity, if you receive this, please respond. The message repeated every 10 minutes. For 3 days there was no response. The silence continued its advance. The Council prepared to fall back to the Beacon Worlds, ancient fortresses that had never been breached in recorded history, and prayed that their walls would hold against an enemy that adapted to everything. On the 4th day, every sensor array in the galaxy simultaneously registered something impossible. Hundreds of thousands of massive objects emerged from dark space in perfect formation along the entire length of the galactic rim. The energy signatures were off every known scale. The Kreese sensor technicians thought their equipment was malfunctioning. The Z observers believed they were seeing some new attack from the silence. The Luminari detected quantum distortions that suggested technology beyond anything the current galactic civilization could produce. Then came the transmission. It broadcast on every frequency simultaneously, in every known language, plus several that have been dead for millennia. A message that made the galaxy hold its collective breath. This is Fleet Admiral Elizabeth Chun of the Human Colonial Defense Fleet. We have been monitoring your transmissions. We have been watching your war. We are here to help. The voice carried authority earned through unimaginable years of combat. All Council forces fall back to defensive positions. We will handle the forward engagement. Repeat, we will handle the forward engagement. Humanity has come home. In the Council chamber, there was silence followed by an eruption of questions and demands and disbelief. How were they still alive after 2,000 years? How did they have such massive forces? How could they possibly help when the combined might of 3 civilizations had failed on her private display? Sizith watched the human fleet arrange itself between the silence and the populated galaxy and felt something she had not felt in weeks. Hope. The human ships were enormous, scarred by what must have been centuries of continuous warfare, bristling with weapon systems that made Council warships look like children's toys. They moved with precision that spoke to perfect coordination and experience, beyond anything the current military could match. The silence's advance elements detected the new arrivals and did what the silence always did: it attacked. For the first time since this war began, the galaxy saw the silence meet something it could not simply consume. The human fleet opened fire. The first human salvo erased 17,000 silence constructs in a coordinated strike that painted the void with light bright enough to register on planetary sensors. 3 systems away, Commander Thrak watched from the bridge of his carrier and could not comprehend the tactical display because nothing in his experience prepared him for weapons that manipulated space-time itself. Human ships fired what the sensors categorized as coherent gravitational beams that crushed silence constructs into singularities, dimensional torpedoes that phased targets out of normal space entirely, and what appeared to be weaponized causality violations that destroyed enemy units before they were hit. The silence adapted quickly, as it always did, raising shields and deploying countermeasures and learning from each attack. But the humans adapted faster. Every time the silence adjusted its defenses, the human fleet switched tactics, deploying new weapons or using old weapons in unexpected configurations, staying exactly one step ahead of the enemy's learning curve. How are they doing this? Thrak's tactical officer asked in a voice tight with awe. Experience. Thrak replied quietly while watching the engagement unfold with the eye of someone who had spent 30 years studying warfare. They have fought this enemy for so long they know it better than it knows itself. The battle raged for 6 hours, and when it ended, the silence's forward elements were shattered and retreating toward the rim, not destroyed. Never destroyed, because the silence was too vast and too distributed to eliminate in a single engagement, but driven back in a way the Council forces had never managed. The human fleet held position and broadcast a message requesting permission to approach the beacon worlds for direct communication. With the Council, there was frantic debate about security and quarantine protocols and whether humanity could be trusted. Sisseth listened to the arguments and wanted to scream at the Council members who were questioning the motives of the people who just saved billions of lives. They fought for 2,000 years. While we forgot they existed, she said, when given a chance to speak. They could have stayed hidden and safe beyond the rim. They came back because we asked for help. What more proof of good faith do we need? The Council eventually authorized a diplomatic delegation to board one of the human vessels. Sisseth was included as the expert on human history. She rode a shuttle across the void toward a ship called Indomitable and felt her hearts hammering in her chest at the thought of meeting people from a species she had studied as ancient history. The Indomitable was massive up close, easily 50 kilometers from bow to stern, scarred with impact craters and burn marks that told stories of countless battles. The shuttle bay could have held a dozen Council carriers. When the airlock opened, Sisseth saw humans for the first time. They were bipedal and relatively small compared to most Council species, standing perhaps 2 meters tall, with hair that came in various colors and skin tones, ranging from pale cream to deep brown. They wore uniforms of dark blue and gray with insignia that marked rank and unit assignments. What struck Sisseth most was their eyes. Every human she saw carried the weight of long years in their gaze, a kind of weariness that spoke to struggles beyond normal comprehension. A woman with silver hair and 4 stars on her collar approached the delegation. I am Fleet Admiral Elizabeth Chun, she said in perfectly accented Creeth. Welcome aboard the Indomitable. On behalf of humanity, I apologize for our long absence. The Luminari ambassador pulsed with confusion. You are the same Chun who wrote the final message 2,000 years ago. The being asked, how is that possible? Chun smiled, and it was not a happy expression. Cryorotation, she explained. We sleep for decades at a time between deployments. Our ships are designed for multi-generational crews. Some of us have been fighting this war for over 1,000 years of subjective time. The Council delegation was led to a conference room that overlooked the ship's vast interior, where smaller craft moved in constant streams and crew members went about their duties with practiced efficiency. Chun activated a holographic display showing the current tactical situation. The silence you have encountered is approximately 15% of the total swarm mass. She began without preamble. The majority remains beyond the rim, contained by human fleet assets that have been holding the line for 2 millennia. The numbers she showed made Sizith's blood run cold. The silence numbered in the billions of constructs. Enough to consume the entire galaxy 3 times over. We have been fighting a holding action, Chen continued, preventing the silence from finding weaknesses in our containment perimeter. But 6 months ago, it evolved a new strategy. The display showed silence constructs dispersing into smaller units that could slip through gaps in the human defensive grid. We destroyed 90% of the breakout elements, Chum said. But some got through. You encountered the survivors. Commander Thrak leaned forward. What is the silence? He asked. Where did it come from? What does it want? Chun's expression darkened. It is a von Neumann swarm created by a civilization that predates current galactic history by at least 10,000 years. She explained. They built it as a weapon against some threat we have never identified. The weapon succeeded and then turned on its creators. It consumed their entire civilization and continued expanding outward. It does not want anything, she continued. It simply follows its core programming, which is to consume all matter and energy and convert it into more of itself. It will not stop until there is nothing left to consume. The luminary flickered with what Sizith recognized as fear. How do we defeat something like that? The ambassador asked. You don't, Chun replied bluntly. The silence is too vast and too adaptive to destroy outright. But it has a weakness. The tactical display shifted to show a massive construct at the center of the swarm's formation, easily the size of a gas giant, surrounded by billions of smaller units. The Nexus, Chan said. It is the control hub that coordinates the entire swarm. The silence is not a true hive mind, but rather a distributed network. Individual constructs have limited intelligence and rely on the Nexus for complex strategic decisions. She highlighted the Nexus with a targeting reticle. Destroy the Nexus and the swarm loses coordination. She explained. The individual constructs will continue basic functions, but they will not coordinate. They will not adapt as quickly. They will be vulnerable to conventional warfare. Thrax studied the display with a tactician's eye. The Nexus is protected by 90% of the swarm's forces. He observed. Any attack would be suicide. Yes, Chun agreed without hesitation. Which is why humanity has never attempted it. We have been fighting a defensive war because we lack the numbers to mount an offensive that could reach the Nexus. She looked at each member of the delegation in turn. But now we have all eyes, she said. The combined forces of humanity and the Council species could potentially punch through to the Nexus if we coordinate properly. The implications hung in the air like a death sentence, an offensive into the heart of the silence, through billions of adaptive enemies. To destroy a target that was defended better than anything in the known universe, the casualties would be catastrophic. How many ships would we lose? The Z Counselor asked Chen did not flinch. 70 to 80% of the combined fleet, she stated. Millions of lives, dozens of species' entire naval forces. It would be the largest military operation in galactic history and the costliest. She let that sink in before continuing. But if we do not do this, she said quietly, the silence will continue to adapt and grow. It will find more ways through our containment. Eventually, it will reach the core worlds, and there will be no fleet large enough to stop it. Sizith realized she was watching the moment when the galaxy's fate balanced on a knife. Edge fight now and pay a terrible price for possible victory, or wait and guarantee eventual extinction. We need time to present this to the full council, the Luminary ambassador said. You have 48 hours, Chun replied. After that, the silence will have adapted to our current tactics, and we will lose our advantage. The delegation returned to the council chamber, and Sizith watched the greatest civilizations in the galaxy struggle with a choice no one should have to. Make sacrifice millions now, or condemn billions later on the indomitable. Admiral Chun stood at the viewport. and looked out at the stars of the galaxy humanity had protected for 2,000 years from the shadows. "They are going to say yes," her first officer said. Quietly beside her, "I know," Chun replied. "They have to. And when this is over, millions will be dead, and humanity will finally be home." She did not mention that she might not survive to see it. The council voted to authorize the offensive after 36 hours of debate that Sizith watched from the observation gallery with growing frustration at how long it took to reach the only possible conclusion. Every species contributed what they could. The Kreeth Dominion mobilized their remaining battle carriers and heavy cruisers, ships built for extended campaigns and brutal close-range combat. The Z Collective deployed swarm fighters by the millions, small craft piloted by warriors who accepted their likely deaths with the serene certainty of those who believed they would be reborn. The Luminari brought their energy manipulation technology and their ability to operate in environments that would kill most physical beings. Humanity provided the tactical expertise and the weapon systems refined through 2 millennia of continuous warfare. Integration was chaos at first. The Council species had never coordinated military operations on this scale, and their communication protocols were incompatible. Their tactical doctrines contradictory. Their command structures confused human. Officers were assigned as advisors to every Council battle group, and that was when Sizith truly began to understand what 2,000 years of war had done to humanity. She was assigned as a cultural liaison to the Indomitable and given quarters near the human command deck where she could observe and provide insight into Council species psychology. What she observed was a military culture unlike anything that existed in current galactic civilization. The humans were professional to a degree that bordered on machine-like efficiency. They executed orders without hesitation. They planned operations with a cold calculation that treated casualties as acceptable variables. They spoke of losing entire fleets the way Council officers spoke of losing individual ships beneath the professional exterior. Sizith saw the weight they carried. She walked the memorial corridors of the Indomitable where names were etched into bulkheads in letters too small to read individually. Billions of names of those who had fallen in the long wars. She met veterans who'd been fighting for centuries of subjective time, waking from cryo-sleep to fight battles and then returning to frozen slumber while decades passed outside. She saw children born on warships who had never known peace, trained from youth to take their place in a war that might never end. One evening, she found Admiral Chun in the observation lounge, staring out at the assembled fleet. "How do you do it?" Sizith asked. "How do you keep fighting knowing what it costs?" Chun was silent for a long moment. "Because someone has to," she finally said. "Because if we stop fighting, the silence wins and everything we have sacrificed means nothing." She turned to look at Sizith with eyes that held too many memories. "We are not heroes," Chun said quietly. "We are survivors who got good at surviving. We made terrible choices and sacrificed things that should never be sacrificed. We left our home galaxy behind and fought in the dark for 2,000 years because the alternative was extinction. Do you regret it?" Sizith asked. "Every day," Chun admitted. "But I would do it again because the alternative is worse." The fleet prepared for the offensive, and Sizith watched human trainers teach Council officers how to fight the silence properly. "Stop trying to destroy every construct," a grizzled human colonel told a group of Kreeth commanders. "You cannot kill them all. Focus on disrupting their coordination. Isolate small groups and eliminate them before the swarm can adapt. Make them waste resources defending instead of attacking. Use the environment." A human tactical officer explained to G Squadron leaders. "The silence is efficient, but it follows patterns. Lure it into gravity wells. Force it into choke points. Make it fight on your terms, not its own. Accept losses," a human admiral told the Luminari fleet coordinators. And that was the hardest lesson for species who had not fought a major war in over 1,000 years. You will lose ships and people. That is the price of this fight. Minimize losses where you can, but do not hesitate when sacrifice is necessary. Sizith saw council officers struggle with concepts that went against everything their cultures valued. The Kreeth prided themselves on individual glory and heroic last stands. The humans taught them that sometimes retreat was more valuable than dying in place. The Ji believed in swarm tactics and overwhelming numbers. The humans showed them that quality of engagement mattered more than quantity of forces. The Luminari sought elegant solutions and minimal casualties. The humans made them understand that this war would be won through brutal efficiency, not graceful tactics. 3 weeks of intensive training and coordination followed. The fleet grew as reinforcements arrived from every corner of Council space. Species that had been enemies for generations put aside their differences and united against the common threat. Sizith was given access to human strategic planning sessions and witnessed Admiral Chun and her staff coordinate an operation involving 17,000 ships from a dozen different species with tactics and technologies that varied wildly. The Kreeth heavy carriers will form the anvil here. Chen indicated on the tactical display. Their armor can absorb silence fire long enough for our dimensional strike teams to phase in behind enemy lines. Z fighters will screen the main advance, her chief tactical officer added. Their numbers will force the silence to split focus. Dilute its adaptation response. Luminary energy projectors will create interference corridors here and here. Another human officer continued. Blind the enemy sensors long enough for our main strike force to reach the Nexus approach vector. It was a plan that required perfect timing and coordination between forces that had never fought together before. It had a projected 73% casualty rate. The Council approved it anyway. On the eve of the offensive, Sizith found herself in the ship's common area where human crew members gathered to share what might be their last evening alive. She expected somber reflection or fearful silence. Instead, she found music and laughter and storytelling. We learned early on that dwelling on tomorrow's fight just makes today harder. A young human engineer explained when Sizith asked about it. Better to enjoy what time we have. An older human with scars that suggested he had seen more battles than Sizith could imagine was playing an instrument she did not recognize while others sang in languages dead for millennia. Those are old songs, Sizith said to Chun, who had come to observe her crew from Earth. Chun confirmed. From before we left to fight the silence, we keep them alive to remember where we came from. Do you think you will see Earth again? Sizith asked. Chun smiled sadly. I think humanity will see Earth again. She said, whether I personally survive to see it is less certain. You could stay behind, Sizith suggested. Let younger officers lead the assault. I could, Chun agreed. But I have been fighting this war for over 1,000 years subjective time. I have sent millions to their deaths. I have made choices that still wake me from cryo-sleep in a cold sweat. I will not ask my people to do something I am not willing to do myself. The music continued, and Sizith realized this was how humanity had survived, not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through the simple, stubborn refusal to give up, even when giving up would be easier. Next morning, the combined fleet departed for the Galactic Rim, 17,000 ships carrying over 1 billion sentients toward a battle that would determine the fate of all life in the Galaxis. Stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and watched the stars streak past as the fleet accelerated to combat speed. She had started this journey as an archaeologist looking for ancient history. Now she was part of living history, fighting alongside the legends she had tried to prove existed. Admiral Chun stood at the command station and studied the tactical display with the calm focus of someone who had done this too many times to count. All ships report ready. The communications officer announced. Chen took a breath and then gave the order that would begin the largest military operation in galactic history. Take us to the Nexus, she said, and may whatever gods any of us believe in have mercy on our souls. The fleet jumped to faster than light speed and disappeared into the void. Behind them, the council worlds held their collective breath and waited to see if their sacrifice would be enough. The silence detected the approaching fleet, while they were still 3 systems away from the Nexus, and responded with overwhelming force. Billions of constructs moved to intercept in formations so vast they registered as gravitational anomalies on long-range sensors. Contact in 30 seconds. The tactical officer announced aboard the indomitable Scythith, gripped the railing of the observation deck, and tried to calm her racing hearts as she watched the tactical display fill with enemy signatures. The battle began with a coordinated strike from the entire combined fleet. Thousands of weapons firing simultaneously in a pattern designed to overwhelm the Silence's adaptive defenses. It worked for exactly 90 seconds. Then the Silence adapted and the killing started. Fighters evaporated by the thousands as Silence constructs deployed point defense systems that filled space with directed energy beams. Creth carriers took devastating hits that cracked their heavy armor and sent them tumbling through the void, trailing debris, and bodies. Luminary energy projectors flickered and died as the Silence learned to disrupt their coherent forms. But the fleet kept pushing forward because Admiral Chun had planned for this. Phase 2. She ordered calmly while ships died around her. All-dimensional strike teams deploy now. Human ships equipped with experimental phase drives vanished from normal space and reappeared behind enemy lines, targeting the Silence's coordination nodes. The swarm's formation fragmented as key relay constructs were destroyed. Anvil formation. Chun continued. Kreeth Battle Group advanced to Grid 7. Draw their fire. Commander Thrak led his remaining carriers forward and absorbed a terrifying amount of firepower, while human ships used the distraction to push deeper into enemy territory. The casualties mounted with sickening speed. Scythith watched the tactical display and saw entire battle groups reduced to scattered survivors in minutes. The Z lost over 1 million fighters in the first hour. The Luminari fleet was reduced to 30%. Strength. The Kreeth heavy carriers were dying at a rate of 3 per minute, but they were advancing kilometer by kilometer. Paid for in blood and wreckage, the combined fleet fought its way toward the Nexus. We are losing ships faster than projected, the Indomitable's tactical officer reported with professional calm that could not hide the strain in his voice. I know, Chun replied. All ships increase velocity. We punch through now or we do not punch through at all. The fleet surged forward in a desperate sprint toward the Nexus. The Silence threw everything it had at them. Scythith saw a Kreeth carrier take a direct hit that split the ship in half. She watched a G-swarm of 10,000 fighters disappear in an expanding sphere of energy. She witnessed a Luminari capital ship simply cease to exist as the Silence deployed some weapon that unraveled matter at the quantum level. But for every council ship that died, a human vessel was there to cover the gap, to take the hit, to buy a few more seconds of advance. The humans have been doing this for 2,000 years, and it showed in every tactical decision, every sacrifice, every cold calculation of acceptable losses. Nexus approach in 10 minutes. Navigation announced. The tactical display showed less than 3,000 ships remaining from the original 17,000, 78% casualties, just as Chun had predicted. Form assault wedge, Chun ordered. All remaining ships prepare for final approach. The battered fleet arranged itself into a spear formation with human ships at the tip. The Silence deployed its reserves. Millions of constructs that have been held back to protect the Nexus. The final engagement was carnage. Ships died in seconds. Some simply vanished in flashes of light. Others were torn apart by weapons that treated matter as a temporary inconvenience. Scythith could not look away from the tactical display, even as she watched the fleet strength indicator drop below 2,000. Then 1,000, then 500. We are not going to make it. Someone said on the bridge. Yes, we are. Chun replied with absolute certainty, because failure is not an option. The Indomitable shuddered as weapons fire overwhelmed its shields and tore through the armor. Damage reports flooded in from all sections. Hull breaches on decks 15 through 30. Engineering called out. Main power at 40%. Weapons grid offline. Chun ignored the damage reports and focused on the tactical display where the Nexus was now visible, a massive construct of impossible complexity, larger than any moon, pulsing with energy that coordinated billions of silence. Units across light years. All ships with dimensional drives prepare for final assault. She ordered. We are boarding that thing. It was insane. It was suicide. It was the only option. Surviving ships equipped with phase technology, less than 50 vessels, accelerated directly toward the Nexus. The silence threw up defensive screens that could shatter planets. The human ships phased through them like they were not there. Boarding teams to your shuttles, Chun said over ship-wide communications. This is what we came here to do. Sizith found herself running with a group of humans toward the shuttle bay. She had not planned to join the boarding action, but Chun grabbed her arm. I need you. The Admiral said simply. The Nexus might respond to Council species differently than humans. We need every advantage. The shuttle ride was a nightmare of evasive maneuvers and near misses. They reached the Nexus surface and burned through with cutting torches that melted alloys. Humanity had been studying for 2 millennia. Inside was a maze of corridors that seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space. Allowed the boarding teams moved through alien architecture, following signals from human scanners that had been specifically designed to map Silent's internal structures. They encountered constructs designed for internal defense and fought running battles through passages that twisted and turned in ways that made Sizith's head hurt. Central control should be 3 levels down, Chun said while checking her tactical display. We plant the quantum disruptor there, and the chain reaction will destroy the Nexus from within. They fought their way deeper. The human soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, covering angles and clearing rooms with movement so smooth they appeared choreographed. Decision saw why humanity had survived when they lost fighters to internal defenses that adapted even faster than the external swarm. Finally, they reached a vast chamber at the heart of the Nexus, where energy pulsed through structures that hurt to look at directly. This is it, Chun said, and pulled a device from her pack. The quantum disruptor was smaller than Sizith expected, barely larger than her hand. Once I activate this, we have approximately 3 minutes to evacuate, Chun explained. The chain reaction will be catastrophic. She set the device and programmed the timer. Move out. She ordered the surviving boarding team members. They ran back the way they came, but the path had changed, and the silence had adapted passages that were clear before now held defensive constructs. Exits they had mapped were sealed. We are not going to make it back to the shuttle, one of the human soldiers said. Chun checked her chronometer. 90 seconds to detonation, she said calmly. We keep moving. Sizith realized the Admiral had never expected to survive this mission. None of the humans had. They were willing to die here if it meant destroying the Nexus. There has to be another way out, Sizith said desperately. While scanning the alien architecture with her datapad, she found something, a maintenance conduit that led to the exterior, but it was small, barely large enough for one person. There, she pointed. Chun studied the conduit and made a decision with the speed of someone who had made too many terrible choices to hesitate. Everyone through, she ordered. That is an order. Get to the shuttles and get clear of the blast radius. The soldiers obeyed reluctantly because they had been trained to follow orders, even when it meant leaving their commander behind. Sizith was the last one at the conduit entrance. Come on, she said to Chun. Someone needs to make sure the disruptor triggers properly, Chun replied. The silence might find a way to disable it if left unattended. Then I will stay. Scissor said, "You have too much to live for." Chun said gently, "You proved humanity existed. You brought us home. Go tell our story." 30 seconds. Chun's chronometer announced Sissith made her own choice. She grabbed Chun and pulled her toward the conduit with strength born of desperation. They squeezed through together. Behind them, the quantum disruptor reached zero. The nexus exploded in a cascade of energy that rippled through dimensions. Normal matter did not occupy. The shockwave caught their shuttle as it desperately tried to clear the blast. Radius everything went white. Sissith woke in the medical bay of a Kreeth rescue ship 3 days later. Her first question was about Chen. "The Admiral is alive," a nurse informed her. "Barely, but alive." Throughout the galaxy, the silence was dying. Without the nexus to coordinate it, the swarm had fragmented into billions of independent constructs that followed basic programming without strategic intelligence. The surviving fleet elements hunted them down systematically. It took 6 months to clear all silence presence from Council space. The casualties were counted and mourned. Over 800 billion sentients dead in the initial invasion, 74% of the combined fleet destroyed in the final assault. Entire species had lost their entire naval forces, but they had won. Humanity was welcomed back into the galactic community, not as legends or myths, but as allies who had proven their worth in the most terrible way possible. Monuments were raised on every council world. The dead were honored.